It was supposed to be just another peaceful Sunday in Cedarwood Lane, a picturesque cul-de-sac, nestled in a quiet, HOA-run neighborhood where the grass was always cut to regulation length and the garbage bins never dared sit more than 12 hours outside. But that morning, the calm was shattered by the shrill, angry voice of Karen Whitmore, HOA board member, clipboard queen, and the unofficial watchdog of everything and everyone on the block. Her yells echoed down the neatly trimmed lawns as she frantically paced her porch, holding up a photo of her missing gray tabby cat named Muffin. "She's been stolen," Karen barked to anyone within earshot. "I left her outside for just 15 minutes while I watered the tulips. Someone took her." Neighbors peeked from behind curtains, doors creaked open cautiously. And within 10 minutes, Karen had already stormed into the HOA group chat, with full capital letters accusing anyone of kidnapping her pet. What made this morning different wasn't just the loss of a cat. The way Karen weaponized the HOA's reach to spin her crisis into a full-on neighborhood scandal. And it didn't stop with passive-aggressive flyers or social media rants. No, this time, Karen picked up the phone and dialed 911. "This is Karen Whitmore. I live on Cedarwood Lane," she said into the phone, breathing heavy. "My cat's been taken. I've reason to believe it was stolen from my property. This is a theft, and I need officers here immediately." The dispatcher, trying not to sigh, logged the call as a non-emergency and sent a unit anyway, partly out of concern for the neighborhood's fragile peace. In the meantime, Karen printed out 28 copies of Muffin's photo, slapped stolen $500 reward across the top in red bold font, and marched door to door distributing them. Like evidence in a trial? Her suspects? Everyone, but especially Mrs. Eleanor Blake, quiet retired librarian who lived 2 doors down and was known for feeding strays. When the officers finally arrived, Karen led them across the street before they even got out of the car. "Her," she said, pointing at Eleanor's home with unblinking certainty. "I saw her outside with a gray cat 2 nights ago. It had to be Muffin. She took her." The officers, both young and visibly uninterested, knocked on Eleanor's door. The sweet older woman answered in a sweater and slippers, surprised by the visit, but inviting them in without hesitation. There, curled up on a plush cat bed next to the fireplace, was a gray tabby. "This little darling wandered onto my porch a few days ago," Eleanor explained. "She was soaking wet and shivering. No collar, no chip. I gave her food and a warm place to stay." Karen barged in without being invited, pointing, "That's my Muffin. I raised her from a kitten. I want her back, and I want her arrested." Eleanor looked stunned. "Arrested?" she whispered. Looking at the officers, who now found themselves trapped in what felt more like a schoolyard feud than a legal matter. "Ma'am," one officer said to Karen gently, "do you have proof that this is your cat?" Karen fumbled through her purse and yanked out a worn photo. It showed a gray kitten with a white paw. The cat by the fireplace had no such marking. "She grew out of it," Karen insisted, though even she didn't sound entirely sure. The other officer scanned the room and quietly asked Eleanor if she would be willing to take the cat to a vet to verify if it had a chip. She agreed instantly. Of course. If this belongs to her, she should have her pet back. But that wasn't good enough for Karen. She stormed back to her house, livid that her authority hadn't been immediately recognized. She then began what she called Phase 2, a digital smear campaign. Within hours, she had posted on the neighborhood Facebook group, the HOA bulletin board, and even the town's community alert app, accusing Eleanor of feline theft and emotional cruelty. She posted pictures of Muffin, detailed how much the cat meant to her emotionally, and concluded every post with a dramatic sign-off: "I will not rest until justice is served." That night, the group chats lit up. Some neighbors took her side, if only out of habit or fear of being her next target. Others defended Eleanor, who had lived in the neighborhood for 15 years without so much as a noise complaint. But it didn't end with just arguments online. Karen called an emergency HOA board meeting for the next evening to address the illegal harboring of stolen pets and the failure of HOA residents to uphold neighborhood trust. Only 4 people showed up. Karen, her ally Phyllis, the HOA secretary, a curious teen, live streaming the meeting for fun, and Optha, actual HOA President Hume had been unaware of the incident until he received 7 voicemail rants from Karen in under 2 hours. Karen Tom began slowly at the meeting. This doesn't feel like something we should be using HOA time and resources to handle. The police are already involved, and the vet will settle the ownership question. But Karen slammed her, hands on the table. This is bigger than Muffin, she insisted. It's about the principle. If someone can take my cat and pretend it's theirs, what's next? Stealing garden tools? Unauthorized hedge trimming? It starts with pets and ends with anarchy. Tom pinched the bridge of his nose. Phyllis nodded dramatically. The teen snickered, quietly in the back. The meeting ended with no action taken, but Karen wasn't finished. She began printing new flyers this time, adding Eleanor's address and a warning: do not support pet thieves. She left them on every doorstep. That was when things began to shift. The next morning, Eleanor opened her door to find her. Mailbox stuffed with apology notes, and her porch stacked with small bags of cat treats. Food and even a new collar that read, "Loved, not stolen." The neighborhood had picked a side. It wasn't Karen's. If you think this story is already wild, just wait until you see how far Karen is willing to go next. The lies, the manipulation, and the community's explosive response are only getting started. Don't miss what happens in the next chapter, and if you love real HOA drama, wild Karen stories, and neighborhood chaos that feels all too familiar, make sure you subscribe to Sham Stories right now for more. You won't believe what's coming next. Karen stood at her kitchen window the next morning, sipping black coffee and fuming as she watched Eleanor Blake's porch slowly transform into a shrine of support. First, it was a small note taped to her mailbox. Then a bag of cat treats appeared. Then another, and another. Someone placed a hand-drawn card that read, "Thank you for caring," with a picture of a gray cat. It wasn't just support, it was a rebellion, and Karen knew it. Her neighbors were choosing sides, and they weren't choosing her. She slammed her mug down on the counter hard enough to chip the handle and muttered under her breath, "Ungrateful sheep." Karen had spent the last 6 years shaping the neighborhood into a model of regulation, structure, and discipline. It was her playground, her castle, her tiny empire of code enforcement and clipboard inspections. And now, because of one pampered cat, the very people she'd policed into perfection were turning against her. That afternoon, she walked the streets again, not to pass out flyers, but to confront. She knocked on Mrs. Johnson's door, then Mr. Patel's. Then the new couple with the hanging plants that technically violated Section 4 of the Exterior Appearance Guidelines. At each door, she gave the same speech, seething through a tight smile. "I just wanted to clarify what really happened with my cat Muffin. See, there's a lot of misinformation being spread. But most people weren't home, and those who were gave short, polite responses before stepping away quickly, clearly not wanting to get pulled into her spiral. Even worse for Karen. Tom Still, HOA president, despite her best efforts to undermine him, sent out an official email to all residents. In light of recent events, the HOA would like to clarify that no official board action is being taken regarding the dispute between Mrs. Whitmore and Mrs. Blake. This is a personal matter under police review. Please refrain from harassment or unapproved posting of resident information. Karen read the email 3 times, red-faced, before hurling her phone onto the couch. Harassment? Unapproved posting? She was the HOA. She couldn't harass her own community. She was trying to protect it. So she did what she thought would be the ultimate power move. She filed for a restraining order. Not against Eleanor, but against Tom. She marched herself to the courthouse with a stack of carefully highlighted Facebook screenshots, excerpts from the HOA charter, and a hand-drawn map of where her flyers had been unlawfully removed. The clerk at the desk blinked twice and gently explained that none of this qualified for a restraining order. "This is a civil disagreement," she said. "You're going to need legal representation if you want to take it further." Karen left fuming and immediately fired off another wave of Facebook posts, this time tagging the local news page, the city council, and even a local animal shelter. Justice for Muffin became her banner. But instead of rallying support, the posts were met with comments like, "Let it go, Karen," and "Lady, the cat chose kindness." Screenshots circulated. Memes began popping up. One showed Muffin in sunglasses with the caption, I escaped HOA hell. Another had a picture of Karen holding a flyer with the words, "Have you seen this cat? She's hiding from me." The story, now circulating online, caught the attention of a local podcaster who specialized in bizarre neighborhood disputes. He reached out to Eleanor for a quote, and to her credit, she declined to speak negatively about Karen, simply saying, "I just hope she finds peace." That was the final blow for Karen, not because she was mocked, not because the neighborhood had turned against her, but because Eleanor had taken the high road. To Karen, that was worse than any insult. That night, Karen turned off her porch lights, locked her doors, began drafting a comprehensive HOA amendment proposal titled Community Pet Accountability and Surveillance Act, which included mandatory tagging, bi-weekly reporting of pet sightings, and even a proposed motion to install animal monitoring cameras at every block entrance. She believed truly that she could win the neighborhood back with bureaucracy. Meanwhile, Eleanor took the cat, who she now called Daisy, though still unsure of her true name, to the vet for the chip scan. She invited Karen to come too, trying once more to solve things calmly, but Karen refused. "She's mine," she told the vet tech over the phone when they called her. "She may not have a chip, but I have emotional history with her." The vet confirmed there was still no chip. The cat was healthy, well-fed, and content. They recommended that whoever ultimately kept the cat should get it properly tagged and chipped this time, but the law was on Eleanor's side. The officers had already filed their report. No sign of theft, no evidence of harm, and no criminal behavior. The cat was legally considered found, and with no way to prove ownership, she stayed with the person caring for her, Eleanor. That decision only pushed Karen further into paranoia. She started photographing neighbors who walked by her house. She accused 3 teens of plotting to catnap her new kitten when she adopted another gray tabby online one that looked nothing like Muffin. She named this one Justice. Neighbors who used to tolerate her now crossed the street when they saw her coming. The HOA received 3 anonymous complaints about Karen herself, alleging misuse of power, harassment, and violation of privacy. Tom, trying to avoid further chaos, set up a closed-door board meeting to formally discuss whether Karen's behavior qualified for removal from her board position. Karen wasn't invited to the vote. She called that a coup. She told anyone who'd listen that this was retaliation for her investigative leadership. But when the votes came in, they were unanimous. Karen was officially removed from the HOA board. When she received the letter, she stood in her driveway for over an hour holding it, as if waiting for someone to beg her to stay. No one did. And as evening settled over the neighborhood, she finally went inside. Her porch light stayed off. Her clipboard disappeared. She stopped patrolling the sidewalks. But something about her silence was more unsettling than her presence. Rumors spread that she was planning a lawsuit, or starting her own HOA. One neighbor joked that she was building a cat-themed neighborhood across town. No one knew. Karen had vanished from public life, but her legend lingered. Eleanor, meanwhile, continued caring for Daisy. She quietly paid for the vet bills, tagged and chipped her, and started volunteering at the local shelter. When asked if she was scared Karen might come back for the cat, she only smiled and said, "I think she's got bigger battles now." What no one knew yet was that Karen wasn't done, not even close. What she had planned next would test just how far a person could go in the name of control, and how far a community would go to stand together against it. Stay tuned for the next segment, because things are about to spiral beyond anyone's expectations. Let me know when you're ready for part 3, and if you're enjoying this story. Don't forget to subscribe to Sham Stories for more true-inspired neighborhood chaos, wild Karen tales, and suburban drama that hits too close to home. The silence that followed Karen's removal from the HOA board was unsettling, not only because it was uncharacteristic, but because it was strategic. For weeks she made no posts, filed no complaints, and submitted no flyers, yet everyone in Cedarwood Lane had the strange sense that she was working on something. Gone were the daily patrols and spontaneous yard inspections. In their place was a strange quiet that lingered behind her curtains. Her blinds remained shut, her porch light stayed off, and her mailbox filled up with unopened mail. At first, neighbors assumed the social backlash and board removal had finally forced Karen into resignation. Some believed she had learned her lesson. Others feared she was simply plotting. Eleanor, who had settled comfortably into life with Daisy, remained cautious but hopeful that peace had returned. She had started spending more time outside, tending to her rose bushes and chatting with neighbors. Daisy often sat beside her on the porch, wearing her new purple collar with a proper ID tag that read, "Daisy, I belong to Eleanor." Most residents began to forget the madness that had exploded just weeks earlier. But that illusion was shattered the moment certified letters began appearing in mailboxes across the block. One by one, residents discovered envelopes bearing a legal watermark, Karen's return address, and the letterhead of Whitmore Legal Watch. Inside each envelope was a 6-page document outlining formal community oversight complaints filed by Karen Whitmore, complete with itemized lists of alleged pet violations, infractions of noise codes, improper use of holiday decorations, and a bizarre clause requesting a full audit of HOA leadership practices for the last 5 years. She also reasserted a claim that her cat Muffin had been abducted and that Eleanor was harboring the animal unlawfully, citing an obscure state ordinance about the recovery of misplaced domestic animals. The letter concluded with a threat to pursue private legal action against Eleanor and any resident found to be complicit in hiding, feeding, or encouraging the continued detention of Muffin. Most neighbors read the letter and laughed. Some tossed it in the trash. Others posted screenshots to the HOA Facebook group, where it quickly became the latest neighborhood meme. One resident dubbed it Karen's Cat Manifesto. But Eleanor didn't laugh. She read every word, highlighted key sections, and took the letter straight to her attorney. A calm and practical man named Russ, who had handled similar small claims chaos before. Russ read through the letter, sighed, and said, "None of this holds legal weight. It's dramatic and slightly threatening, but there's no case here. She's just trying to scare you." Still, Eleanor felt the weight of it, not because she feared the legal system, but because she knew Karen. Karen wasn't the type to back down. Her pride was stitched too tightly to her sense of control. So Eleanor followed Russ's advice. She filed a cease and desist notice in return, had Daisy's ownership formally documented with the vet, and made sure all her Duxor cats were in a row. But while Eleanor acted calmly, Karen's next moves escalated everything. 3 weeks later, a white van appeared outside Eleanor's home early on a Saturday morning.
Oh!
2 strangers in polos and lanyards knocked on her door, claiming to be from a local animal rights nonprofit doing pet recovery advocacy. Eleanor invited them in cautiously. They asked questions, probing, pointed ones about Daisy's origin. She had any documents proving the animal was hers. Whether she had ever seen Muffin before adopting Daisy, and if she'd be willing to release the cat to them temporarily for observation. Eleanor's instincts screamed no. "Do you work with Karen Whitmore?" she asked directly. The men exchanged glances and said they were simply investigating reports of a pet being wrongfully held. She asked for credentials. They offered none. Instead, they handed her a pamphlet and left when she insisted on calling the police. The moment they drove off, she called Russ and then the non-emergency line. The police arrived, took her report, and told her they would document the incident as a suspicious visit. It was clear this wasn't a sanctioned organization. It was likely Karen's doing, a hired private firm or friends pretending to be officials. Word of the incident spread fast. The neighborhood, already wary of Karen, now bristled with quiet anger. Residents began organizing discreetly. Group messages turned into backyard conversations, and before long, they formed a neighborhood action circle, separate from the HOA. Their goal was simple: protect each other from further harassment. They started documenting Karen's tactics, pooling resources to consult lawyers, and even discussed applying for a protective community injunction if her behavior continued. Meanwhile, Karen finally resurfaced publicly, but not in person. Began publishing digital newsletters titled The Cedarwood Truth Report, which she printed and left in mailboxes weekly. The newsletter featured rants, fabricated interviews, conspiracy theories about the HOA board's corruption, and long editorials about Muffin's spiritual connection to her. One particularly strange issue included a timeline of betrayal, documenting the moment Muffin disappeared to the day Daisy was seen in Eleanor's window. The tone was increasingly unhinged, with references to the soul of Muffin being stolen and the idea that Eleanor had bewitched the cat. This prompted Tom and the HOA board to issue a formal block-wide policy limiting unsolicited flyers and printed materials. Karen accused them of censorship. She filmed herself posting a newsletter to her own mailbox and screaming free speech, as if being persecuted. Yet despite her madness, something shifted when Eleanor, urged by a few close neighbors, finally decided to go public with her side of the story. She wrote a calm, dignified letter to the HOA and neighborhood group, explaining the facts from start to finish: how the cat had wandered onto her porch, how she'd cared for it, how she offered to work with Karen to find a resolution, and how she had faced threats, legal harassment, and false accusations since. The letter included photos, vet records, and the name of her lawyer. But the final touch? Simple closing sentence that read, "We all love our pets, but no one should use them as weapons." The effect was instant. Residents flooded her with support flowers, cards, even offers to chip in for her legal fees. The mood across Cedarwood Lane shifted fully. Where once there was division, there was now unity. And that unity was turning toward action. Tom announced a full HOA board meeting with one item on the agenda: whether to pursue legal steps against Karen for continued harassment of residents. Karen, of course, wasn't invited to lead it, but she showed up anyway, marched into the community center 30 minutes early, set up her own podium, and began handing out her latest truth report. But this time, no one took a copy. They ignored her, walked around her, and when the meeting started, she wasn't allowed to speak. Instead, Eleanor was invited to address the board. She did so with grace and calm, ending with a simple request. "I'm not asking for punishment. I'm asking for protection." The board voted unanimously to send a formal cease and desist letter to Karen on behalf of the entire HOA, warning her that any further personal attacks, fraudulent letters, or attempts at intimidation would result in civil and possibly criminal consequences. Karen stood frozen at the back of the room as the vote was read aloud. Her face, usually flushed with self-righteous fire, was pale. For the first time in months, she didn't say a word. She turned, gathered her unsold newsletters, and walked out into the night. But deep down, everyone knew Karen wasn't done. She would never be done. Her grip on Cedarwood Lane might have slipped, but her obsession with Muffin, with Eleanor, and with control still burned quietly beneath the surface. What she had planned next would take the entire neighborhood to a place darker than anyone expected. If you're ready to see how far Karen will go, and how one community stands together to fight back against obsession and abuse of power, don't miss the next chapter. And if you've been hooked by this true inspired suburban chaos, be sure to subscribe to Sham Stories for the next explosive segment. The uneasy quiet that followed the HOA board's cease and desist notice didn't last long, and anyone who believed Karen would retreat quietly had forgotten who she was. A week passed without a newsletter. Windows remained shuttered, and for a brief moment, Cedarwood Lane returned to normal. Kids played soccer in driveways again. Lawnmowers buzzed on schedule, and neighbors finally enjoyed porch chats without looking over their shoulders. Eleanor, ever hopeful, took the lull as a sign that perhaps Karen had accepted defeat or, at the very least, found something else to obsess over. Daisy remained happy and settled, no longer flinching at passing footsteps or strange cars. But the neighborhood was being lulled into a false sense of peace. One Thursday morning, a drone buzzed overhead. It hovered near Eleanor's front yard, then shifted awkwardly toward the side of her house and back again, bobbing in the air like a mechanical mosquito. Eleanor was in the garden when she noticed it. First, she assumed it belonged to the teenagers 2 houses down, but when it swooped unnaturally close to Daisy napping on the windowsill, she grew uneasy. She waved her gardening glove and shouted, "Hey!" The drone backed off too quickly, too deliberately. It zipped toward Karen's home and disappeared behind her chimney. Within 10 minutes, Eleanor called Tom. Tom didn't hesitate. He had received similar complaints from 2 other neighbors who'd seen the drone hovering suspiciously near backyards earlier that week. He and another board member walked over to Karen's with calm expressions, but phones recording in there. pockets. Karen answered the door wearing a property rights are sacred t-shirt and immediately barked. "I'm not talking to you unless my attorney is present." Tom kept his voice level. "We've had reports of a drone trespassing. I'm asking if you know anything about it." Karen didn't blink. "I have a right to monitor the safety of my neighborhood. If others won't report crimes, someone has to, Karen," Tom said with a sigh. "You can't use drones to spy on people. It's a violation of privacy laws and HOA rules. This isn't a surveillance zone, it's a neighborhood." She slammed the door without another word. Tom filed a formal complaint with the city, and within days, municipal notice arrived at Karen's door, warning her against unauthorized drone use. She posted a photo of it on the neighborhood Facebook group, adding the caption, "They want to blind justice." But things were only getting worse. 2 nights later, a motion-triggered security camera captured Eleanor, someone wearing her signature windbreaker and visor sneaking onto Eleanor's porch around midnight. The figure knelt down, reached for the cat's water bowl, then turned sharply toward the camera's red blinking light before darting away. Eleanor, shaken, called the police. She showed them the footage and gave a copy to the HOA board. The officer, a stern woman who had responded to Karen's original 911 cat complaint weeks earlier, recognized the behavior immediately. "This is escalating," she said. "She's not letting go of this." The police took a report and warned Eleanor to keep all recordings, locked secure, and to call immediately if anything else happened. The HOA added new language to the community bulletin. Surveillance, trespassing, and harassment will not be tolerated by any resident. Legal action is being prepared if these activities persist. Karen, predictably, interpreted this as a personal threat. She began her next phase-in-line escalation. She launched a blog titled Muffin, where she wrote lengthy essays about the unlawful seizure of her companion animal. Comparing her experience to historical injustices, she cited laws out of context, twisted statements from board meetings, and reposted grainy old photos of Muffin with long captions detailing her emotional trauma. The blog gained traction not from locals, but from online Karen supporters who had no idea about the actual events. Strangers began leaving comments like "Justice for Muffin," "This HOA is corrupt." Some even doxed Tom, sharing his business info online. Tom, a normally reserved man, was horrified when a fake 1-star review showed up for his construction business, claiming he was an animal thief. Meanwhile, Karen reached out to a small-time documentary filmmaker who specialized in quirky neighborhood disputes. She spun the story her way. A sweet, older woman wrongfully stripped of her beloved pet by a manipulative HOA, and a secretive woman with a history of luring cats. The filmmaker, not realizing the scale of Karen's lies, agreed to film an interview. When his van showed up on the street, Eleanor's heart sank. She watched Karen dramatically gesture for the camera, pointing at her house and holding up muffins. Baby photo-like evidence in a murder trial? Eleanor had enough. The next morning, she met with her lawyer Russ again and filed for a restraining order. The midnight portage, the midnight porch video, screenshots from the blog, and police reports. Russ filed it all, and the judge, seeing the mounting evidence, approved the order with a condition. Karen was not to contact Eleanor, approach her property, use surveillance devices on or around her home, or mention her publicly online. Order was served the next day. Karen's response? She filmed it. She walked outside, holding the envelope, and yelled at the camera. "They think they can silence the truth, but justice has claws." She was now so deep into her delusion that no one could reach her. At that point, the HOA board convened again this time to draft an official petition to have Karen removed, not just from the board, which had already happened, but barred from any committee positions and prohibited from hosting or managing any neighborhood events. They circulated the petition quietly. Within 4 days, over 80% of residents signed. Meanwhile, Eleanor tried to return to a normal routine, but the emotional toll was building. She began locking her gates even during the day, avoided the front porch, and rarely let Daisy out of sight. She still received daily support from neighbors, but the harassment had taken something from her. A peace she'd once found in the neighborhood, the slow trust she'd built with residents Karen, had poisoned it. But Eleanor wasn't broken. She decided to hold a small neighborhood gathering, not an HOA event, just tea and cookies on her lawn. She invited everyone personally, except Karen. Nearly the entire block showed up. Children played with Daisy, who roamed the lawn without fear, and for the first time in months, laughter returned to Cedarwood Lane. As the sun set, Eleanor thanked everyone and said simply, "This neighborhood is what we make it. I believe it can be kind again." The next day, Karen responded by publishing a new blog post titled "The Witch's Picnic," claiming, Eleanor had hosted a mind control ritual using cat energy and gluten-free cookies to brainwash residents. It was so absurd that even her few remaining online followers began to question her sanity. The HOA's legal team sent her a cease and desist order for defamation, and the blog was taken down within a week. But behind the scenes, Karen wasn't done. She had begun researching civil court filings, sending public records requests to the HOA, and documenting every interaction she claimed proved a conspiracy against her. Eleanor, now fully aware of Karen's obsession, began preparing for what came next, and what came next would not be a blog post or a drone flyover. It would be a full court filing. Karen, convinced she had grounds for theft of property, formally sued Eleanor in small claims court seeking $2,500 in damages for emotional distress, the loss of Muffin, and defamation. The community gasped when word got out. It was the final escalation, the moment everyone realized Karen truly believed her delusion. The court date was set. The entire neighborhood would be watching. The question wasn't whether Eleanor would, when it was whether the community would finally, legally, and permanently shut down Karen's reign of chaos. If you've made it this far and want to see how this wild HOA courtroom showdown plays out in whether Karen's final plan will backfire spectacularly, stay tuned for the final part. And if you're loving this real-life-inspired madness, don't forget to subscribe to Sham Stories right now so you don't miss the explosive ending. The day of the court hearing dawned gray and cool, clouds stretching lazily across the morning sky like a curtain, preparing to fall on the final act of a drama that had gripped Cedarwood Lane for months. At precisely 9:45 a.m., Eleanor Blake arrived at the county civil courthouse dressed in a simple blue cardigan, holding a small folder containing the restraining order. The cease and desist notices photographs of the cat in question and statements of support from no fewer than 16 of her neighbors. She wasn't nervous. Not anymore. She was tired, yes, but resolved. There had been too many weeks of whispers, stress, and watching over her shoulder, while a woman who had once chaired neighborhood barbecues spiraled into obsession over a cat she had failed to chip or tag. Eleanor entered the waiting room and took a seat beside her lawyer Russ, who nodded calmly and gave her a reassuring glance as he reviewed the notes. Across the room, wearing a dramatically long scarf and sunglasses indoors, Karen Whitmore sat alone with a bright red binder and a manila envelope labeled Confidential Cat Crimes. She clutched it like it contained the secrets of the universe. She didn't speak to anyone, instead scanning the room for people she might recognize. No one acknowledged her. None of her neighbors came to support her, not even Phyllis. The courtroom opened just after 10, and the clerk called the case of Whitmore versus Blake, the judge. An older woman with keen eyes and a no-nonsense tone reviewed the basic facts and asked both parties to step forward. Karen immediately launched into a monologue. She claimed Muffin had been abducted from her front porch in broad daylight, that Eleanor had paraded the stolen cat publicly in an act of psychological warfare, and that the entire HOA board had participated in a vast cover-up to protect what she called the suburban cat thief. She cited online blog posts, her cease and desist letter from the HOA, and quoted various loosely connected property laws that had nothing to do with pets. She also attempted to introduce a printed-out meme from Facebook as evidence of public humiliation. The judge held up her hand, stopping Karen mid-sentence. "Ms. Whitmore, I've read the filings. Let's keep this focused. Do you have any documentation proving ownership of the cat?" Karen's face stiffened. "I raised Muffin since she was a kitten. I have her baby picture." Waved a glossy photo of a tiny gray kitten with white paws, cuter than words. "Yes, but not legal proof." "That's a photo," the judge said, evenly. "Was Muffin ever chipped? Tagged?" Registered with a vet under your name? She didn't need any of that, Karen snapped. She never left my porch until someone stole her. Eleanor remained silent, hands folded in front of her. When asked to respond, Russ gently stood and presented clear evidence, vet documents, showing Daisy's checkups, a digital copy of the restraining order filed after the porch trespassing, statements from neighbors who had seen the cat wandering for days before Eleanor took her in, and finally, the police report confirming there was no chip, collar, or evidence of abduction. Then Eleanor spoke, softly but clearly. This cat wandered onto my property scared, cold, and hungry. I took care of her. I never claimed ownership until after trying to find her original family and ensuring she was safe. When it became clear no one could legally prove prior ownership, I did what was responsibly, had her chipped, collared, and documented. The judge flipped through the paperwork. The silence in the courtroom was palpable. After a long pause, she closed the file. Ms. Whitmore, I see no evidence that Ms. Blake stole your pet. The animal was not tagged, chipped, or claimed through any formal channels prior to her discovery. What I do see is a pattern of escalating behavior on your part, including attempts at surveillance, harassment, and misuse of public resources. Karen's mouth opened, but the judge continued. Your lawsuit is denied. There is no claim here. But she wasn't done. It's Blake. Would you like to file for court costs and damages associated with defending this suit? Eleanor glanced at Russ, who nodded. Yes, Your Honor. So ordered, Miss Whitmore. You are to pay $1,200 to Miss Blake within 30 days. Karen made a strange choking sound, a mix of disbelief and fury. As the gavel came down, she stood frozen for several seconds before spinning on her heel and storming out of the courtroom. But the damage was already done. The ruling rippled through Cedarwood Lane like a lightning bolt. Within hours, screenshots of the court decision circulated through neighborhood group chats. Tom posted a polite but firm summary in the HOA newsletter. The matter regarding Ms. Whitmore and the alleged stolen pet has been settled in court. The HOA respects the ruling and considers the issue closed. All residents are expected to respect the privacy and dignity of others moving forward, but Karen wouldn't fade away quietly. That same night, her porch light flicked on for the first time in weeks. She stood outside with a new cardboard sign duct taped to her mailbox. Muffin forever. Justice never sleeps. No one responded. No one asked questions. Her online blog had been removed due to the court ruling. The documentary crew backed out of the project. Even the handful of online strangers who once rallied for her had disappeared, recognizing she was not a victim but a tyrant wrapped in delusion. Meanwhile, Eleanor took Daisy to the vet for a routine checkup and got a clean bill of health. The cat had gained weight. Her coat was soft, and the vet confirmed she was thriving. She's doing great, the vet said. Looks like she found her forever home. Eleanor smiled, finally letting herself believe it. For the first time in months, she didn't feel like she had to watch her back. She returned home that afternoon to find a surprise waiting, a handmade card left on her porch with a tiny drawing of a gray tabby. Inside it read, "Thank you for being the neighbor we all wish for, Cedarwood Lane." Tears welled in her eyes. The battle had been long, ridiculous, and exhausting, but she had won. Not just the court case, but the respect and unity of her neighbors. That weekend, the HOA hosted a block party. There were banners, music, lawn games, and tables of food stretching from driveway to driveway. Eleanor was given a seat of honor beneath the big oak tree where she sat with Daisy, curled up on her lap. Karen, of course, wasn't invited. Her house sat dark, blinds closed again, as laughter and chatter echoed around her. She watched from the shadows, isolated by her own doing. In the months that followed, Karen would try, in small ways, to reinsert herself into community matters, submitting letters, making complaints, but her influence was gone. The HOA rejected every submission that smelled of drama, and neighbors no longer entertained her theories or accusations. She became a footnote in the history of Cedarwood Lane, a cautionary tale about pride, control, and the danger of turning personal grievance into public warfare. But Eleanor, she became something else entirely, the quiet hero. the woman who stood her ground with dignity, protected an animal in need, and showed a fractured neighborhood how to come together. Daisy remained her loyal companion, never again wandering beyond the garden fence. And whenever a new family moved onto the block, they'd often hear the story from a neighbor about the time a cat, a clipboard, and a lot of crazy turned an ordinary street into the setting for something unforgettable. And they'd always end the story with a chuckle and one line, "Don't worry, Karen doesn't run the block anymore." If you love this full-length, real-life-inspired HOA drama, where a single accusation spiraled into a community rebellion, don't forget to subscribe to Sham Stories for more wild neighborhood sagas, untamed Karen chaos, and unforgettable true-style suburban tales you won't believe until you hear them. Hit that bell because the next story might be happening on your street